Chicago Bears general manager Ryan Poles shouldn't make too many assumptions about his own job security after watching the Minnesota Vikings fire their GM abruptly, despite having a lot more success under his tenure than Ryan Poles and the Bears.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lauren Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. On the show today, we're going to take a look at how the Vikings firing their general manager, Kwesi Odofo-Mensah, should be a real warning sign and a wake-up call for general manager Ryan Poles of the Chicago Bears that, hey, just because you got the young quarterback and the smart head coach doesn't mean that your job is necessarily secure. We'll compare where the Bears and Vikings situations do differ a little bit, but also looking at the track record of these two GMs side by side doesn't put Ryan Poles in an amazing light comparatively to the guy that just got fired. And then we'll wrap up checking in on the Bears' offensive coordinator vacancy after Declan Doyle was hired away to the Baltimore Ravens on Friday. Today's episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use our promo code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Thanks for making the Locked On Bears podcast your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, now the #1 sports podcast network. And I'll leave all the analysis of why the Vikings fired their general manager to Luke Braun over at Locked On Vikings here in the Locked On Podcast Network. But what jumped out at me right away was how much Poles and Kwesi Odofo-Mensah have been compared to each other since they both took over their jobs. Obviously, they came into different situations with where the Bears were and where the Vikings were, but it was the same year. It was the same hiring cycle. I remember there being some reporting that perhaps the Vikings had kind of maybe preferred Ryan Poles and ended up going with Kwesi after the Bears landed Ryan Poles, but that's a little bit beside the point at this point. But if they kind of followed some similar timelines, at least early on in their general managing careers. You look back, and when Ryan Poles was hired in 2022, he hired his head coach, Matt Eberflus. Kwesi hired his head coach, Kevin O'Connell. Same time, same starting date. Again, the Vikings were a little bit more of a contender. They had a veteran quarterback in Kirk Cousins at the time that was a little bit more ready to win now, whereas the Bears were tearing down a bit more at that stage and doing more of a full-blown rebuild. But even as those timelines move forward, right, the Bears draft their young franchise quarterback in the 2024 draft in Caleb Williams. And same draft, later in that first round, the Vikings go out and get J.J. McCarthy. Now, obviously, J.J. McCarthy's injured for his whole rookie season, and Caleb is not. And there's plenty of differences in where they were picking those quarterbacks and where those two teams were when they picked those quarterbacks. And, of course, the Vikings is complicated by the other quarterbacks they had on the roster and chose to move on from. But Ryan Poles gets the chance to fire his first head coach and hire a second head coach in Ben Johnson that seems to be obviously and clearly a heck of a lot better, whereas Kwesi doesn't get that opportunity. I mean, obviously they weren't looking to fire Kevin O'Connell. They're not going to fire Kevin O'Connell, but they keep Kevin O'Connell and move on from the general manager. Despite under Kwesi, the Vikings have a 63% win percentage. It's funny, Ryan Poles and Kwesi Odofo-Mensah in their tenure as general manager have almost the exact opposite win-loss record. They both obviously had the same number of regular season games, 4 seasons worth. Ryan Poles has won 26 games. Kwesi and the Vikings have lost 25 games. Like the Vikings have won more games than the Bears have lost, and vice versa. Like it's been very clear that this Vikings team has had a lot of success. Plenty of other things have gone wrong, but like they've had a lot more success than the Bears have had under Ryan Poles, and yet their general manager is gone. And so I would imagine if I'm Ryan Poles, I'm looking at that going, yeesh, that's maybe a little bit of a short leash there. And that, well, how long is my leash? Because if I'm Ryan Poles, well, I hired the smart offensive coordinator, play caller, head coach. You know, like Ben Johnson and Kevin O'Connell certainly have plenty of differences, but like they're in the same category of like guy that every team wishes they have. And obviously Ryan Poles has done a lot better at the quarterback position now with the player that they each drafted in that 2024 draft class. But I think it goes to show that like an organization, whether it's the Vikings or the Chicago Bears, can and will stick with the head coach over the general manager when they feel like there is a real discrepancy there. And you can't help but feel like there's already a little discrepancy there in Chicago, maybe not as wide of a gulf than it had been in Minnesota, but it's an interesting power dynamic to consider here, right? Like you would have thought that if Ryan Poles, Ryan Poles got his coach pick wrong and is still sticking around. Kwesi Odofo-Mensah picked the right head coach. He made the right coaching hire and also made some really solid quarterback decisions up until the draft 2 years ago, but like got Sam Darnold to play at a high level, had Daniel Jones in the building, like, and maybe that's largely part of his coach, but nonetheless, like it wasn't as though the Vikings were picking in the top 10 every season the way the Bears were for each of the last 3 years up until now. Like, so I just think Ryan Poles cannot sit here today and feel like, well, I hired Ben Johnson, I drafted Caleb Williams, so my job security's got to be super secure, right? Like, I think I even personally have maybe given him too much job security in that regard. Like, kind of felt to me like, well, if you let him fire Matt Eberflus and then hire Ben Johnson, then you're tying him to your GM, your GM and your head coach and your quarterback altogether, right? That if Ben Johnson and Caleb Williams are successful, then Ryan Poles gets to keep his job because he drafted that quarterback and hired that head coach. I'm not so sure that is 100% the case. Like, I don't think Ryan Poles is like instantly sitting on the hot seat, but I do think it's a reminder that organizations are smart enough to separate those things and say, yeah, you picked this head coach and this quarterback, but if you make too many mistakes in the rest of the roster building process to where it feels like you are part of what is holding this head coach and quarterback back, well, then the organization might not be afraid to make a change. And I know it's like, well, didn't Ryan Poles just get a contract extension last offseason? Yes. So did Kwesi Odofo-Mensah. Like a year ago, they gave their general manager a contract extension. So like that just doesn't end up meaning all that much. Like Ryan Poles got the contract extension when his team was bad. Kwesi got his contract extension when the Vikings were 14-3 last season. They've had 2 double-digit win seasons in under that general manager and gone. They had 1 year below 500. Like they're clearly been the higher performing team on the field. And so, man, Ryan Poles has got to be thinking he's lucky stars. He's still the Bears general manager. And I mean, we talked plenty on this podcast, and any Bears fan I know has talked about how many people wanted to see him fired when they fired Matt Eberflus and just made a clean swap over. But if it gets you Ben Johnson and Caleb Williams, maybe it was worth holding on to Ryan Poles for now. But I think it just puts all the more pressure on him that like you can't afford to miss on more big free agents or any big trades. And it's like important draft picks. Like if he starts stacking too many of those, he could wind up just like his colleague on the Minnesota Vikings. I want to compare more closely. Like obviously Kwesi and the Vikings have won more games, but I think the Vikings general manager has more noticeable compounding mistakes than Ryan Poles, who also has plenty of mistakes on his own. But I want to kind of compare and contrast these two general managers that have been compared to each other plenty since they both started their jobs. Next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by PrizePicks. The big game is almost here, and there's no better way to cash in during America's biggest sporting event than with PrizePicks, where it always feels good to be right. And this week, PrizePicks has a special max discount for the big game, live in the app right now. Drake May just needs 1 passing yard for the max discount to win. So you add 1 or more other players to your lineup, and if your picks hit, you can cash in. It's super simple to use. You just pick more or less on 2 to 6 player projections. And it's that simple. It takes 60 seconds or less to make your picks across football, basketball, soccer, hockey, tennis, boxing. I mean, you name it all. They've got it in the PrizePicks app. So download the PrizePicks app today and use our promo code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks. It's good to be right. The Locked On Bears podcast is also brought to you by DripDrop. Kicking off the new year feeling good is the goal, right? And honestly, hydration is the easiest win. I know when I stay on top of it, my energy, my focus, and my mood all level up. But let's be real. Plain water doesn't always cut it, especially when you're grinding through long days, you're hitting the gym, or just trying to stay consistent with your health goals. But that's where DripDrop comes in. Doctor-developed, proven fast hydration that helps your body and mind work better. Think clearer focus, better energy, elevated mood, and even that fresh skin glow. DripDrop's science-backed formula is trusted by firefighters, medical professionals, and over 90% of top college and pro teams because it rehydrates you faster and more effectively than water alone. Right now, DripDrop is offering podcast listeners 20% off your first order. Go to DripDrop.com and use our promo code LOCKEDONNFL. That's DripDrop.com, promo code LOCKEDONNFL for 20% off. Stock up now at DripDrop.com and use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL. I want to thank you again for making the Locked On Bears podcast your first listen today. We really do it for all of you that are tuning in and making us your first listen, whether it's 1 day a week or 5 days a week. And if you want to take your listening to the next level, you can get an ad-free audio feed of Locked On Bears on Apple Podcasts and Spotify and any of the podcasting apps. If you go to the Locked On Bears Everydayers Club, the website to check it out is lockedonbears.supercast.com. If you want to take your listening to that next level, there's also a Locked On Bears group chat in the Everydayers Club Discord server that's exclusive just for listeners of this podcast. So if you want to go check it out, the link is in the show notes. It's lockedonbears.supercast.com. Because when I look at what Ryan Poles and Kwesi Odofo-Mensah have done as general managers, it's clear that Poles has been more successful, especially, the last 12 months have been a really big key for that. But even dating back farther, Ryan Poles has been the much better general manager in the draft. Maybe not quite as good in free agency, but neither one has been particularly stellar in free agency, which is true for pretty much every general manager. But I want to kind of take a second here to say, okay, like if Kwesi was bad enough to get fired, how much better is Ryan Poles than him? Like, just how much more job security should he have then? Like, I think the big reason the Vikings made the change was NFL draft focus. So let's start there briefly because, boy, we spend all our time looking and talking about the Chicago Bears, but if you take a second and look at some of the Minnesota Vikings' recent NFL drafts, especially the first couple under Kwesi, it's pretty rough. You can see, it maybe helps you appreciate, at the very least, a little more appreciation for Ryan Poles' drafting ability in the first couple of rounds. Because that first Vikings draft under Kwesi, their first round pick was a safety named Lewis Cine, C-I-N-E. He is out of the NFL. Their cornerback in the second round, Andrew Booth, I believe he is out of the NFL, or at least they weren't on any rosters for the 2025 season. I think they were on practice squads. But first and second round picks from 2022. That's like the Kyler Gordon, Jaquan Brisker draft. Their first and second round picks weren't on any NFL teams this season, whereas the Bears have a big contract extension for Kyler Gordon, and now Jaquan Brisker is about to get paid. They drafted a guard that year, Ed Ingram, who is okay. Linebacker Brian Asamoah has been okay. He's been fine for them. And then you get to the later rounds, and I'm not going to hold these GMs too accountable for the later rounds. He did get Jalen Naylor, a wide receiver, in the sixth round of that first draft class, but like wasted first and second round picks there are stuff that you can maybe get away with once early in your career as a general manager, but hard to keep it going. He bounced back a little bit in year two with Jordan Addison as their first round pick, the wide receiver from USC. But then they pick in the third round the cornerback Mekhi Blackman, who has not been a consistent starting caliber player for them at all. Now jumped to the Colts this year and had a better year, but 2 years after they drafted him, he was gone on another team, their third round pick. Then they drafted a safety in the fourth round, Jay Ward. He hasn't done much of anything. Like, they got Jordan Addison. All right, you got a draft pick, but out of the first two drafts, he's about the only thing that you can step away from and say, oh yeah, they came away with some value there. Whereas Ryan Poles' first two drafts had some mistakes in there for sure. Velus Jones, Zach Pickens, Roschon Johnson, Tyler Scott, for sure. There's some mistakes there, but like, he hit on Kyler Gordon. He hit on Jaquan Brisker. He hit on Braxton Jones as a fifth round pick to give you a 3-year starting left tackle, was absolutely a hit there. Obviously has hit on Darnell Wright. Seems to have hit on Javon Dexter for the most part. Tyreek Stevenson is the one in there that, is not a bust, but maybe hasn't been as good as you hoped he's been, but he's shown flashes of it there. I mean, you've come away from those first couple of draft classes with real talent that you can trust in developing. From there, like the last 2 drafts, it's hard to get too far ahead of yourselves and say, are these players for sure great or not? But obviously, Caleb Williams, Rome Odunze, Colson Love, Luther Burden, Ozzie Trapillo, all looking really solid. For the Vikings, J.J. McCarthy's a giant question mark. Dallas Turner, the pass rusher from Alabama, started to finally give you a little something this year, so maybe he's coming around on it. And they drafted an offensive lineman in the first round this year who looked fine, but they've also traded away a bunch of their draft picks and traded down a bunch in there. And, traded for T.J. Hawkinson is probably a decent trade for them, although now that he's been hurt a couple years, he's not quite the same guy, so how great of a trade is that in hindsight? I think it was worthwhile for sure. He couldn't account for the injuries to come, but still maybe not the home run that it felt like at first. Ryan Poles obviously had some bad trades in there with Chase Claypool. Sweat hasn't been as good as I think we hoped when they traded for him, but all of a sudden hits a home run with the Joe Tooney trade, and the Jonah Jackson deal is looking like a good one so far. So he's coming around in that area as well. So you can start to feel a little bit of like, okay, Poles definitely drafted a lot better than Kwesi. He's missed on some 3rd and 4th round picks for sure, but he hasn't missed as nearly as bad as the Vikings general manager has. And I think that's part of why Minnesota hasn't been able to win a playoff game under that regime, and despite having some really successful regular seasons. But in free agency, I think that's where you see Poles, he misses on guys like Dio Dengbo right now, Grady Jarrett. Nate Davis was a big one for him, Gerald Everett. He's swung for the fences on a few of these and definitely not panned out. He's gotten some good value out of guys like TJ Edwards and Andrew Billings. Kevin Byard, I think, proved to be good value. Drew Dahlman was a good fit so far. I've seen Nashawn Wright outproduced his contract. But for the Vikings, Kwesi made some smart signings. Zadarius Smith turned out to be a good value for them, and then they traded him and got some draft picks for him after he had a good season for them. Harrison Phillips was a solid defensive tackle for them for a while. Brought up Sam Darnold off the street and got him to play super high-quality football. That was great value. Andrew Van Ginkel, kind of a nobody they signed in free agency. He's become a big-time pass rusher for them. Jonathan Grenard was a big splash signing on their defensive line pass rush. That was a big bump for them. They missed on Marcus Davenport. They missed on Jonathan Allen this offseason, has not been anywhere close to as good as they hoped he was. There were some big swings and misses in there, but I think he was a smarter free agency general manager, but a much worse draft general manager, and hard to kind of say on trades, but did less of them in terms of players than Ryan Poles. And so I think in the grand scheme of things, Poles has been the general manager, the better general manager for sure. Drastically better, maybe not, but I do think it is probably more important that your general manager gets your 1st and 2nd round picks right than it is you get your free agents right. And it's not to downplay free agent misses as not a big deal, because they are a big deal, but I think there's less of a long-term consequence of you miss on a free agent. Usually you can get out of it in a year or 2, and then you're kind of right back where you started from and can use that cap space to instantly replace it. But a draft pick is a long-term investment. You're putting 4 years into these guys to figure out if they're any good. And along the way, when they are good, they come at a much cheaper price than free agents. Hitting on a draft pick is and hitting on all of your early draft picks or most of your early draft picks is so much more valuable than hitting on your free agents. It's such a premium resource that, to his credit, Ryan Poles has been better at than Kwesi Odofo-Mensah. We still need to see Rome Odunze keep taking that next step, and Caleb Williams still has to keep taking that next step, and Darnell Wright and Loveland and Burden and Trapillo have more work to do, and want to see what Shamar Turner turns out to be, and you hope you can salvage something out of Karan Amagaji. There are misses in there for sure that don't make Ryan Poles some top flight general manager, but you can at least, in my mind, I can at least start to separate him a little bit more from Kwesi Odofo-Mensah than he would have been a year ago. I think this past offseason of nailing the offensive line and nailing the draft picks and nailing the head coach hire have boosted Ryan Poles' grade. I'm not putting a letter on it, but have boosted the evaluation and opinion of Ryan Poles a lot more than it would have been 12 months ago. Whereas it's kind of gone the opposite direction for Kwesi, and it got the Vikings GM fired. The Bears GM holds on his job for now, but if he misses on 1st and 2nd round picks, say in this year's draft, and misses on a free agent in this year's draft, I don't know if that means Ryan Poles gets fired instantly next offseason, but starts to build, right? And all of a sudden, I don't think he can sit here and just say, well, I've got Ben Johnson and Caleb Williams. I'm sitting pretty here. I've earned my job security. They're not going to fire me. I got these guys in. Well, they'll fire just about anybody if they feel like it's going to be in the best interest of the Bears organization. So certainly Ryan Poles should be feeling that pressure that I don't think Ben Johnson and Caleb Williams should be feeling some of that same pressure right now. They just got to keep doing what they're doing. Poles has to keep succeeding above and beyond. I guess the next immediate step for the team then is going to be finding a new offensive coordinator, with Declan Doyle off to the Baltimore Ravens. On this podcast, we talked about some potential internal candidates that could replace him before, but I want to look at some guys outside of the organization that might make sense if Ben Johnson wants to add another new voice into the offense. And we'll talk about some of the pros and cons of the different types of options he has next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by Quo. New year, new systems. This is the time when a lot of us look at the messier parts of how we run our business and think, there has to be a better way, right? And there is. Streamlining your communications is one of the quickest upgrades you can make. And that's why today's episode is brought to you by Quo, spelled Q-U-O, the smarter way to run your business communications. Because when your team is reachable, organized, and communicating in one place, you're not just working cleaner, you're creating more opportunities to connect with customers. Your whole team can call and text from one shared business number, so nothing gets missed. And their smart AI tools at Quo automatically log calls, summarize conversations, and highlight next steps, so details never slip through the cracks. So make this the year where no opportunity and no customer slips away. Try Quo for free, plus get 20% off your first 6 months when you go to quo.com/lockedonnfl. That's quo.com/lockedonnfl. Quo, no missed calls, no missed customers. The Locked On Bears podcast is also brought to you by Gametime. There's nothing like being in an NBA arena or any other live entertainment event in your area. The crowd, the energy, the moment. But getting the tickets, though, that part hasn't always been so simple. But that's why Gametime has become the go-to app for scoring tickets fast without the hassle, because it puts the advantage back where it belongs, with the fans. Gametime has all-in pricing upfront, so you're not going to run into any surprise fees when you go through the checkout process, and you can see your view from the seat before you buy your tickets to make sure you know exactly what you're getting. So take the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets or concert tickets, comedy shows, theater events, you name it, with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use our promo code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. That's code LOCKEDON, locked on, for $20 off. Download the Gametime app today. And remember, it's gametime.co, not .com. So while Ryan Poles keeps his job for now, the Bears offensive coordinator, I guess, does not. He chose to leave his job, didn't lose his job, but jumps over to the Baltimore Ravens. Declan Doyle will get to be the play caller for Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry under new head coach Jesse Minter of the Baltimore Ravens. And that leaves a big old hole in the Bears' offensive coaching staff under Ben Johnson. And we don't have to go back through the internal candidates. Obviously, wide receivers coach Antoine Randall would make a lot of sense. They could promote passing game coordinator Press Taylor, maybe quarterbacks coach JT Barrett. And if I were a betting man, I would think the odds are most likely that it comes from an internal hire. But, that's the problem. The problem there is you promote your wide receivers coach, well, then you need a new wide receivers coach. You promote your quarterbacks coach, you need a new quarterbacks coach. You promote your passing game coordinator, maybe you want a new passing game coordinator. So it could just be easier to say, screw it, let's just go bring in somebody that I already know and trust and kind of add their expertise and their voice into the mix to give you something new, and somebody who wasn't here already and working through all the same decisions that you have, like someone who can lend a fresh perspective to the kind of things you want to do on offense. And I think there's an interesting list of names here. Some might be slightly more realistic than others, but I think there's a lot of guys with connections to Ben Johnson's coaching staff and his past with the Lions and even his past with the Miami Dolphins before that, I think would make a lot of sense. One name that I've seen, let me take this a different approach. I think there's three main buckets of coaches you could go after here. Three main pathways for Ryan Poles to replace Declan Doyle. We'll go through a few guys in each category here. There's the go back to the Lions and take another player off of Dan Campbell, take another coach off of Dan Campbell's staff that you didn't steal the first time, but now you got another opening, so go steal him now. Like someone who's been there already that you worked with before that he's been sticking around, but now you can give him a promotion in Chicago that he's not getting in Detroit. One of the popular names that's been thrown out there is the Lions wide receivers coach and assistant head coach Scotty Montgomery, who's another one of these kind of young ascending coaches he was actually a college head coach at East Carolina for a little while, was an offensive coordinator at Maryland for a little bit, and then came back to the NFL, coached Jonathan Taylor in the Colts for a couple of years before coming over to the Lions, initially as running backs coach, now wide receivers coach. So he's coached different positions across the offense and is one of these guys who has led teams before and knows what he's doing in terms of being around some successful organizations in the process. Is Ben Johnson going to want to go and just steal another guy from Dan Campbell, or did he kind of say, I stole your guy, I stole the guys I wanted the first time. I'm not going to keep digging back into that well, because it could be Scotty Montgomery there, could also be Lions quarterbacks coach Mark Brunell. Yes, that Mark Brunell, the former Super Bowl champion, Pro Bowl quarterback of the Packers, Jaguars, Saints, couple other teams in there. He is the Lions quarterbacks coach and has been pretty much the whole time that Ben Johnson and Dan Campbell have been there, at least. He didn't get the Lions offensive coordinator job when Ben Johnson left. He didn't get the offensive coordinator job when they fired John Morton this year. Mark Brunell keeps getting passed over for the Lions offensive coordinator job. So Ben Johnson could say, hey, Mark, Dan Campbell's not going to give it to you. Why don't you come and do it for me? I'll give you the offensive coordinator job. I feel like that could, if Mark Brunell's goal is to work his way up, much like, Declan Doyle, then this could be a better opportunity than what the Lions have been willing to offer him the last couple of seasons. The other name I'll throw in here that I think would be the biggest middle finger to Dan Campbell that I would totally sign up for, but I think is very unlikely. But if I'm Ben Johnson and I want to be a jerk, I'm trying to get Lions offensive line coach Hank Fraley, who is also their offensive run game coordinator. It was huge for the Lions to retain him. He's been a big part of their offensive line success for the last 4 or 5 seasons. Another guy, same conversation as Mark Brunell, right? He's been an offensive line coach in Detroit for, 8 years now. Never gets the offensive coordinator opportunity. Why don't you come out over Chicago? And then you're just stealing one of the best assistants off of Dan Campbell's staff, making him offensive coordinator, knowing that Ben Johnson's still the play caller. You don't even need this guy to be a great offensive coordinator. He's just another voice in the room. And boy, wouldn't it be nice to take him off of the Detroit Lions' hands? That would be a fun one there. But I don't think quite as likely there. But 3 guys on the Lions staff that I think would make some sense for sure. I'm not sure that's the pathway Ben Johnson's going to go. A couple other young rising coaches that Ben Johnson has connections to that, again, I'm not thinking are crazy likely, but sure would be fun. For example, they took Declan Doyle from Sean Payton's Denver Broncos, right? Declan Doyle was not a coach that Ben Johnson had ever worked directly with, but came highly recommended to him. So why not go poach the next young coach from Sean Payton's staff that you haven't actually worked with, but he's going to be a hot name, so get the smart guy in your room. Offensive pass game coordinator, quarterbacks coach Davis Webb, the former NFL QB. He got, I think, a head coaching interview this cycle, despite being a QB coach for the Broncos, but he's not the offensive coordinator, and the Broncos haven't made him the offensive coordinator. Or did they promote him in this process to finally make him the full offensive coordinator? I think, now that I'm thinking about it, they may have finally rewarded him with that upgrade. So that might take him off of the table, because I think that just happened a couple of days ago. Yeah, literally earlier today, as I'm recording this podcast, they just promoted him. So scratch that. And breaking news right as I'm doing this podcast, I guess, that I was just searching Davis Webb and it came up as offensive coordinator. I was like, wait a minute, what? Literally this morning when I put this podcast together, he had not gotten the promotion yet. So it was too late now for Ben Johnson to steal Davis Webb. The other name I'll throw in there is Josh. I don't know if it's Grizzard or Grizzard. He was the replacement for Liam Cohen on the Buccaneers last season. And they made a change in Tampa, but he's been a kind of a fast rising coach. He took a passing game coordinator job with the Eagles now for 2026, but that's not an OC job. So the Bears could still take him and make him their offensive coordinator. He was, I believe, wide receivers coach with the Miami Dolphins when Ben Johnson was coaching on the Dolphins. I think Johnson coached tight ends at the time. Either way, they were assistants together in Miami for a while, and he's been a well-regarded offensive-minded coach around the NFL who's been an offensive coordinator before and could have another opportunity to do so with the Chicago Bears. That would be an upgrade over the job he's taken with the Eagles. 2 other names I'll throw in real quick that I think are real possibilities, but I'm not a big fan of. It's a no thanks, but you never know. I don't think we can rule out the possibility that Ben Johnson brings in the offensive coordinator the Lions just fired, John Morton. It did not go well in Detroit. I do not want to see the Bears go out and bring in John Morton, but Ben Johnson has talked multiple times about how John Morton has been a mentor to him and someone he credits a lot of his success as an NFL coach to the things he has learned from John Morton. So couldn't rule out the possibility that, okay, well, like John Morton wasn't great as a play caller in Detroit, but could come to Chicago and help with game planning and stuff as the offensive coordinator, a more experienced veteran voice in the room than the young guys they've been cycling through, I guess. And another guy in that exact same category is Darrell Bevell. He's been an offensive coordinator for a bunch of teams around the NFL, the Lions. He was the interim head coach of the Jaguars after being the Jaguars offensive coordinator. I think he worked with Press Taylor in Jacksonville briefly. He was a Seahawks offensive coordinator under Pete Carroll. He was a Vikings offensive coordinator before that. Spent this past couple seasons as the Dolphins QB coach, but has a lot of experience working with Ben Johnson. So again, I wouldn't love it, but we don't have to panic too much about an offensive coordinator hire. I just wonder, like, does Ben Johnson want to try to break this cycle of, if you hire another young ascending coach, even Antoine Randall, he might get hired away next year the way Declan Doyle did. And like, are you going to start changing over offensive coordinators every year because they all just keep getting hired away? Or would you prefer to hire an older guy who's just kind of is what he is at the stage of his career and isn't necessarily going to get a head coaching job like a Darrell Bevell or a John Morton? Like, those guys aren't going to get hired away, but they're not nearly as exciting or intriguing or as quality of a candidate as some of these other guys that we talked about here. So a little bit of a pick your poison there for Ben Johnson, but I trust that he'll pick a guy that he knows, he trusts, and has a lot of faith in being a positive influence on this offense. Whoever the Bears name as offensive coordinator, you can be sure we'll break it down for you right here in the Locked On Bears podcast. So make sure you hit the subscribe button on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts, because that's going to be the best way to keep up with all of our daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. You can join the Everydayers Club and get ad-free Locked On Bears at lockedonbears.supercast.com, or you can keep tuning in wherever you listen to the podcast. We really appreciate it every single time you do, and I hope that when you do listen to Locked On Bears, it gives you just one more opportunity to bear down.